Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Thompson. You might not have ever heard of me. I actually come from the advertising space. So the way that journalism is actually monetized, that everybody gets a salary. For the last decade of my life, I've worked on an initiative called the Local Media Manifesto that is about trying to get more funds back into journalism in Canada, making sure that advertising dollars are following suit. In my last role, I actually oversaw about $1.5 billion amongst my team invested into Canadian media. So it's a massive amount of investment and usually something from a journalism perspective that is often overlooked. I actually believe that journalism doesn't get its fair share, quality news, media, lifestyle content, everything wrapped into it, of what is invested from an advertising perspective. I could go on and on about Google. I'll only go on a little bit about Google. I could go on and on about Meta and Bill C-18. If you ever want to talk to me about any of these topics, please reach out. I think also I have a lot of heart for what the Canadian government has tried to do, but has definitely failed to accomplish in making sure that we're getting dollars into journalism and making sure we don't have a misinformed or disinformed populace. But I'm going to talk about something that probably none of you, well, maybe some of you have actually thought about, which is, this is a staggering fact. Most people don't know this industry, but by 2036, the market for web scraping is projected to reach this number. This is a booming industry while thriving in the realms of unregulation, copyrights infringement, and basically is teetering on the edge of theft. So when you become published, somebody is scraping it, stealing it, monetizing it somewhere else, either in a Gen AI or in whatever we want to call as big tech these days. And I relate this very simply to media owners, journalists. You are farmers of wheat. You are growing a very worthwhile crop. And someone comes along and says, I need to make bread, so I'm going to steal this. And what ends up happening is an unsustainable marketplace. And even with the growing cases that we have right now of lawsuits, I think you might have seen Perplexity yet again is being sued for copyright infringement. Thank you, Jeff Bezos. It's a massive problem right now of not just content. Content in this reality is data. And data is what everybody actually wants. So imagine this. I worked with one publisher most recently, and we were looking at their website to help them understand how do we monetize your asset beyond just advertising, right? Selling real estate against articles seems pretty straightforward in the era of programmatic. I can work with a multitude of different platforms to make it so. But what we found was that there were about 20 different crawlers just scraping content off their website. And that means that someone was stealing from them. And often that cost comes with no compensation because copyright law takes about 5 years to follow up. So this content, essentially unstructured data, remains one of the single most valuable assets in the digital landscape. What journalists create in grounded, quality, fact-based data. And it's just being mishandled. It's just being stolen. It's also unappreciated from the value that it actually creates. And its significance is crucial for various AI applications that are appearing, be it voice assistants or generative AI. That's a given. But there are other applications of this data that really do serve the market. Most of the time we were talking about syndication or licensing deals when it came to this, but there are more applications and more markets for data created from journalism than ever before. So you've spent most of your day today probably talking about how to use data to improve the quality of your journalism. I'm talking about how your journalism actually creates data that is valuable beyond just a website, an article, be it. To understand the magnitude of the predicament that we're currently in, I'm going to talk a little bit about web scraping, but I need to kind of go back in history of something that we don't talk about. I'm always very scared right now of the digital dark age that we have as the internet keeps getting overwritten and information seems to be falling through the cracks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this guy. Does anybody know who this is? No one. He's impacted every single one of your lives, and none of you know who he is. Okay, great. This is where I like to start. Let's take a moment and think about a horrible day, September 11th, 2001. And on this fateful day, this gentleman, Amit Singhal, the director of search quality at Google, was attending a text retrieval and indexing conference. That sounds super boring, but that's what he was doing that day. And while the world was captivated by the unfolding tragedy of September 11th, his team faced a stark realization that search results for the World Trade Center were outdated and irrelevant. For anybody of my age group, you probably remember when Google was indexed. It was a month behind. It wasn't operating in real time. And all of that, from that moment on, drove the direction that Google inevitably went on. This realization made Google innovate rapidly. They created an internal tool to index news websites. The RSS feed was created that had news in real time. This tool would cluster, rank stories autonomously. A precursor. When you think about Google at this moment in time, Singhal had a reflection that captured the transformation that Google then went through. When September 11th happened, we as Google were failing our users. Our search was failing them. So we placed links to all the news organizations right on the front page saying, please visit those sites to get the news of the day. And this is what Google looked like at that time. Most of you do not remember this probably, or were even born, hard to say. And this pivot led to the creation of Google News, a landmark innovation that has shaped how we consume journalism and information. And while this centralized news information, inevitably what they were doing was scraping. They were scraping news content, centralizing it, and monetizing it for the benefit of Google. This history is important because we are now at another very similar moment. This is a moment when, if I talk to owners of and editors at the CBC or others, when they started to lose control. They lost control of their websites, their traffic, their audiences, and the value and how the news was presented. And then in the early 2000s, I actually worked in PR, so I was pitching journalists. And we measured the value of print articles by measurement. Does this, if I take a ruler to it, does it look the same as anything else in the world from an article? And this was called advertising value equivalency. I could take a news article and go, this equals this much from an advertising, and therefore the article is worth this much to an advertiser or somebody I pitched the story on behalf of. And it's interesting because what was scraped then never really had fair compensation to media and journalists. There was a few reasons for that. One is digital adoption of advertising was really slow. We also have centralization where everybody used the word scale. And we started creating a practice where everything of profit and advertising and data now went to intermediaries, not the actual creators. And this has created what we aptly say as the third-party distribution allowed first-party data to leak into the open ecosystem, diminishing the value of unique content and assets. Technically speaking, everything that journalism and media owners did spilled into the open web, and everybody else but them were able to monetize it. And now we have a similar sort of situation that I like to run as a parallel. As AI companies plan to scrape and build new models off of AI, this means that they're going to start doing rev share and advertising. If I look at the top 100 websites currently in Canada, chat is currently number 42, and they will be monetizing that. Where does that content come from? So we have an urgent need for new solutions so that media owners are actually gaining back control of what's going on. But when you start seeing the complexity of how Google and others actually work, and this is actually a legitimate lawsuit, like the artifact coming out of the antitrust case in the United States, and if you have not followed that case, you need to watch it. This is how advertising works, according to Google. And it's meant to look this complicated. And now we're embarking in the next level of complication, which is, I believe as big tech, I should have the right to your data, to what you produce as a journalist, for the betterment of society. Again, the wheat and the bread analogy holds. And the general problem that we have is a majority of media organizations don't actually know how to value what they create. If I went to any publisher in Canada, they would say, I value my content based on a CPM, cost per thousand, how much I can sell the advertisement. That's not what it's worth. And that valuation is something that I'm currently working through with a lot of organizations to understand. Number one, what do you sue big AI for? How do you monetize this in a new reality? And how do you use it to foster journalism and gain back control of what has been lost? I also will say data spills into the open market in a means of actually gaining advertising revenue. And a big component of this is something called DSP. In advertising, there is an SSP, or supply side, what a publisher uses to be able to have their inventory put in market. There are ad exchanges. You can think about this as like stock markets for bidding for advertising. And then there's the DSP, which is actually where the ad is delivered. Again, if you want to go look at the Google case, Google had first look at the bid and last look at a bid, which is basically not really a fair marketplace for advertising. But what's happened is publishers lose 90% of their valuation on advertising by going through this process. So they lose revenue at every given moment. What also is happening is that they're spilling their data into DSPs where others are monetizing the content, their understanding of audiences, their understanding of Canadians into the market. And this is a problem that now requires new ideas. If we think about the rise of large language models, search models, it's really important to understand the need for sophisticated data management, valuation strategies, quality, accuracy. We shouldn't, as journalists or media owners or publications, be scared of AI. We should understand, how do I make money in this so that I can foster what I'm really good at and serving audiences with information that they need. I'll talk about one article that most recently I noticed flew around the internet everywhere. It was an article by Michelle Sika at the Maclean's, and it was called The End of Home Ownership. And the reason why this article really stands out to me is because it flew around the web, but it contains economic data, contains facts, contains trends. It is a well-researched piece of content. If you take all of the back catalog of Maclean's since it was published, there is in-depth intelligence in everything that is produced. That, again, is what's being stolen. As AI technology continues to evolve, we face pretty much the most crucial decision of any moment in time in media, which is we must negotiate the true value of the creation of journalism. What is this actually worth? Not big tech deciding what it's worth, not market players, not governments. Media owners and journalists need to determine the value of what they are actually working on. It takes blood, sweat, and tears. It takes time. I remember sitting with Robin Doolittle when she was talking about there was no advertising revenue that came to her at the time when they did the articles around the Toronto Police Department and not assessing the rape kits. But what she's produced is data. What she's produced is a story that you can trend, that gives us cultural insights, behavioral insights, economic insights, public service insights. That is invaluable. I'm going to give you a little bit of a lay of the land of what actually creates value when it comes to data. Number one is data quality and accuracy. This is where journalism, in all its shapes and forms, be it investigative, lifestyle, anything, it has quality and accuracy. The second is data volume and diversity. For anybody to build an AI model, you need as much diverse data as possible so that it spits out a better answer. I think we've all gone in and probably tried to use one of these forums, Claude, name it, and you type in a question and it spits out something that's so incredibly generic. It's because the data is not good. They've been scraping from the open web. Now they are coming for journalism. The third is exclusivity and rarity. This is where there's actually a lot of opportunity that most publishers and media owners don't really appreciate. You sit on something that nobody else can provide. And that exclusivity creates market value. Think about it as an Hermes bag. Same kind of philosophy. Not that many made, has a valuation. Really important. There's also contextual value. So what's the information that's being provided? And how does that actually help in a lot of different use cases, be it economic insights, behavioral insights, consumer insights? A big one that was proven when Google decided to create the Google News Initiative and all of those projects is recency. If you think about the origination of this almost 20 years ago, we were scraping data and it was a month behind. Now we are living in a real-time engine. Recency really does matter. And generative AI requires recency because if you go in and ask a question about, I don't know, P. Diddy's case, you're not going to get much recency in the response to that. You're not going to get the latest facts. They need that data to be able to create their summaries. History is also important, trending, application potentials, and of course, regulatory compliance. There is a lot of information that helps from a compliance perspective for us to better govern our country. You have to think about all of this in a way that it's anonymized, it's aggregated. You can even look at things like synthetic data. But now that we think that AI is the bee's knees of the ultimate product, it needs great journalism. It needs great articles, content, video, images, great stories, well-researched, fact-based. And the value of content is not just in its presence, but it's in quality and relevance. The value that AI has only comes from the sources that it relies on. And we need to start prioritizing those and start thinking about it, even as a journalist, about how do you start fostering that? How do we start collecting our information, organizing ourselves, not just for the audience, but for the data opportunity attached to it? I'm going to say one last thing that I think is hugely important to remember about this topic. One, history matters, and history is often lost. Two, just because big tech thinks that it's important to have this for some viable valuation of a larger corporation doesn't mean that they should bulldoze over journalism. And the final one is everything that you write has more value than just advertising. You can actually build something that is a product that is bigger than ads. And to me, this is the biggest area of this new space of how do you monetize the content in a way that actually makes journalism more viable and more successful and prosper so that everybody has great salaries, that we have fewer news deserts, and that we actually have an informed populace, especially as we come up to yet another federal election. So I leave this with you. Please start considering this, that when you are writing an article, that is data. And that data should be monetized to your benefit, not big tech. Thank you.